Steve Adubato here. We're once again joined by our good friend, Dr. Junlei Li, who is Senior Lecturer in Early Childhood Education at Harvard's Graduate School of Education and Senior Fellow at the great Fred Rogers Center for Early Learning and Children's Media. Doctor, you joined us for one other segment. You agreed to stay with us because there are a couple of issues I want to raise. COVID-19, as we tape on the 24th of June, and its impact on childcare itself, childcare centers, overall childcare. What should we be most concerned about?
I think we need to be most concerned about the way that historic inequalities in childcare is now being magnified under the impact of COVID-19. Inequalities in many different areas, but fundamentally at this idea that childcare educators, right, providers, particularly those who are serving working class families, are historically have struggled with very, very low wages. And we are now in a situation that childcare providers can't dig themselves out of this financial crisis. And it is so critical to think of childcare as a sector, as an essential function of society, not just something that's nice to have, which means that collectively, not just childcare providers themselves, but families and parents collectively have to lend their voice to support, to ask for not just the kind of resources that help them to get by, but the kind of resources that once and for all can correct the inequity. When you have childcare workers who immediately were let go when everything closed down, when they are able to actually, in some cases, right, they have more payments from unemployment than they were able to make at their regular job. There's something fundamentally wrong with that system. And to think that this is the profession to which we trust our children, right? Of all the things in the world, this is the profession to which we trust the things we care the most about, our children.
Our most precious resource.
That's right. And meanwhile, as a whole, right, we're not able to support that profession, particularly those who serve working class families in lower income communities.
But Doctor, I'm going to follow up on that. When we were together in Vermont last year at about this time at the Terrell Fund Day for Children, we talked, and this is again part of our larger childcare initiative right from the start. And Jay, I asked you about policy. So in light of what you just said, this description of childcare and its the implications of COVID-19 on childcare and everything that means, what appetite do you believe there is on the part of federal policymakers, but also state policymakers, governors, legislatures, and I know it's state by state, but it's a national crisis, to actually look at the implications of COVID-19 on childcare and everything you just described and say, wait a minute, we need to overhaul this system. We need to put more money in it while states are struggling to figure out how to balance their budgets. Help us square that.
I think policy makers, right, ultimately respond to the voices from communities. And I think it is insufficient for the voices advocating for better support for childcare and early childhood education to come primarily from the professional side, whether they're the professional associations or the professors like me, right? I think the most powerful voices in this discussion are coming from families. Families who need to return to work, families who are deeply invested in their children, but like all of us, needed to juggle, make a living, right? And then being with their children. And COVID-19 has made that need and that juggling even more powerful. And I think families have learned to trust and count on their childcare providers. And so when families across sectors can lend their voice, then we can increase the receptivity of policymakers, right? If that voice only comes from, let's say, researchers, only comes from the professional associations,
or the media,
then it's lost, right? Because every professional association is advocating for them, and rightfully so. But I think there's something about the education of young children that brings together constituents from those who work in the sector, from those who are families who depend and trust that sector with their children, but also from the education sector who relies on early childhood education to help to build a bridge so that these children can transition into school and continue to be successful. So we have at least 3 massive sectors involved that can put the voices together to advocate for the sector that has the least amount of resources when it comes to children's development.
Final question along those lines. If the response on the part of federal and state and local policymakers, those who control budgets, those who control dollars that go to childcare centers, subsidies, if you will, childcare credits, support, tax credits, whatever policy options are available, if they say it's not the right time, we're just trying to get out of COVID, we've lost billions and trillions of dollars all over the place, state budget, federal budgets, et cetera. If they say now is not the time, let them know in the couple minutes we have left what the longer term implications are for these children who do not have anyone. Not they don't have anyone. There are very few advocating for them. What are the long-term implications for those children if we do not do for them what they need to be done to get quality, affordable childcare during and post-COVID?
To me, I think the long-term implications are not just to children, but to our communities and society as a whole. I think what COVID reminded us and magnified is how the existing inequalities, right, and is magnified by these outside stress. So if we don't invest in early childhood, what that would happen, right, is it's not only that it impacts the children, it impacts the families whose ability to work, right, whose ability to balance making a living and supporting their children is compromised.
And impacts the community.
Impacts the community, but it also impacts employers too.
How
right?
so?
The ability for families to work, the abilities for family to not continuously worrying and stressing about juggling between work and family impacts the commitment and the productivity of people at work, which then impacts the outcomes for employment. So what we're doing, right, by failing to demand better and do better for the early childhood sector, we're going to not only maintain, but we're going to exacerbate the inequalities, which has been fundamentally the challenge that we're experiencing under this global pandemic.
And that includes the digital divide, which we talked about in the other time we had to talk to you. Doctor, I cannot thank you enough. Everyone on behalf of our team and the public television family and the folks who are very committed to early childhood, the folks at the Terrell Fund and others, wish you and your family all the best. Thank you for joining us from Boston up at Harvard. And you have an open invitation to be with us and shed wisdom, insight, and give us important things to think about. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for always bringing these important topics using your platform and medium so that we as a community can talk about it.
We're all in it together. Thanks, Doctor. I'm Steve Adubato. We'll be right back.
Think Tank with Steve Adubato has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation. Funding has been provided by PNC, Grow Up Great, the Terrell Fund, supporting Right from the Start NJ, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Atlantic Health System, New Jersey Sharing Network, the Northward Center, the Healthcare Foundation of New Jersey, the Fidelco Group, and by Johnson & Johnson. Promotional support provided by the New Jersey Business and Industry Association and by New Jersey Monthly,